Ghost of Tsushima is a game that's been a long time coming. Its developer Sucker Punch hadn't released anything new since 2014's infamous First Light. Personally, I've been extremely excited to get my hands on Ghost of Tsushima since its announcement at PlayStation's Paris Games Week showcase back in 2017, as Sucker Punch have consistently made games I've loved for almost 20 years, with both the Sly Cooper and infamous franchises. Ghost of Tsushima is by far the biggest and most ambitious project Sucker Punch have tackled yet. It's a meaty open world game with a sprawling story, a serene open world that rewards you for exploring it, and a cast of memorable characters whose stories are wonderfully explored through optional missions. After spending roughly 50 hours with Ghost of Tsushima and getting the Platinum Trophy, I feel comfortable saying that this is Sucker Punch's best game yet. In Ghost of Tsushima, you play as Jin Sakai, the lone survivor of a samurai army that attempted to fend off an invading Mongol army. After the battle, Jin is left severely wounded, awakening days later after being treated by a thief named Yuna. He discovers that his home, the island of Tsushima, has been overtaken by the Mongol invaders, and that his uncle, Lord Shimura, has been taken prisoner by them. Jin then sets out to save his uncle and liberate Tsushima. The story of Ghost of Tsushima doesn't necessarily do anything that we haven't seen before, but it does do a good job of evoking the feeling of the samurai movies it draws inspiration from, and its excellent cast of characters that Jin recruits along the way definitely do a lot to elevate the story. I also did find myself invested in the relationship between Jin and his uncle, and without spoiling anything, I was definitely satisfied with the way the story concludes. Jin was a character it took me a little while to warm up to. I was initially concerned that Jin was going to be a little one-note and bland, but as his story progressed, I became engrossed with the internal struggle Jin was facing. He was forced to deal with his guilt over an incident in his past, and had to come to terms with abandoning his samurai code and doing things samurai like his uncle would consider dishonourable for the greater good of saving his home. Ghost of Tsushima has a fascinating and memorable array of side characters who you recruit to fight alongside Jin, all of whom have interesting motivations that are fleshed out through their side missions. There's Lady Masako, who's on a quest for revenge after her entire clan was betrayed and slaughtered, Yuna, the thief who saves Jin's life after he's mortally wounded in the initial invasion of Tsushima, Norio, a warrior monk looking to liberate his temple from the Mongols, and Sensei Ishikawa, a master of the bow whose student Tomoe has joined the Mongols and is teaching them his techniques. I ended up totally invested in these four characters and was genuinely excited to play their missions to see how their stories unfolded. An element of Ghost of Tsushima I truly appreciate is how minimalistic its UI is. It's such a breath of fresh air and helps keep you in the moment. A good example of this is that when you set a location to go to on the map, the wind will guide you to it. This is such a clever design choice as it removes the need for an obnoxious marker on the screen at all times that would break the immersion of the game. Ghost of Tsushima is a game that you should just let yourself get lost in. Soak in the environments and take your time exploring, because the game rewards you with countless optional tasks scattered all over the map. As I wandered the map, uncovering the layer of fog that covered it, I was given a sense of exploration I haven't felt since Breath of the Wild. It's also worth taking your time to talk to NPCs, as they often offer information on new side objectives that you haven't discovered. Where Sucker Punch have always excelled in the past is with their gameplay, and Ghost of Tsushima is no different. The combat is fast, slick and bloody, and the gorgeous environments are fun to traverse with some well-designed platforming segments. The combat does have a slight learning curve to it due to its lack of lock-on, which bothered me at first but quickly became a non-issue when I realised the lack of lock-on was due to the game's focus on fighting multiple enemies at once. This focus on crowd control keeps encounters interesting, as you really need to think about which enemies to tackle first so as not to get overwhelmed. Ghost of Tsushima is a game I'd recommend cranking up the difficulty to hard on, as it forces you to think more strategically about the fights and use every tool at Jin's disposal. The combat systems in Ghost of Tsushima are deep and varied. Jin's primary weapon is his katana, and the fast and brutal sword combat is where Ghost of Tsushima shines the brightest. There are 4 separate stances Jin can utilise with his sword, each suited for combating specific types of enemies, and getting in the habit of switching between them constantly is vital to your success. Jin also has a bevy of other weapons in his arsenal, There's a half bow, a long bow, kunai knives, sticky bombs, and smoke bombs. In a lot of open world games, I end up being given a selection of tools, but only using the same few over and over again. This wasn't the case in Ghost of Tsushima. I found situations where each of these tools were effective, and found myself often rotating through every tool available during Ghost of Tsushima's bigger battles. As Jin deals damage to enemies, he fills up a gauge of energy at the bottom of the screen. You can then spend that energy to refill your health or perform powerful attacks. Eventually, you'll also unlock an ability called the Ghost Stance, that allows you to cut down 3 enemies in a very gruesome fashion with 1 hit each. To use the ability, you need to defeat a number of enemies without taking a hit. While the combat can sound overwhelming at first, it's really not. The game introduces new mechanics slowly over the course of the game, so as not to inundate you with too much information at once. There's also the standoff mechanic, which is arguably the coolest part of Ghost of Tsushima's combat. When you enter a battle, you have the opportunity to perform a standoff. This has you hold down the triangle button to have Jin place his hand on his sword ready to draw it. If you time it right, by letting go of the button right as the enemy attacks, Jin will cut his opponent down with 1 clean swing of his sword. This can then be upgraded through the skill tree to allow Jin to follow up with instant kill hits for multiple surrounding enemies. The standoffs feel like something straight out of a samurai movie, and even by the end of the game, they never failed to feel exciting. If the direct approach isn't your style, Ghost of Tsushima also offers plenty of opportunities for stealth. There are also a handful of items tailored for stealth players, like firecrackers, which can be thrown to distract enemies. I found the stealth fun, but often took a more aggressive approach to enemies, as the swordplay was just so satisfying. There are some missions that require you to play completely stealthily, and these are usually accompanied by instant fail states if you're spotted, which can be frustrating. But Ghost of Tsushima does a pretty good job of justifying these mission types with story reasons, and they're not frequent enough to be too irritating. There's a pretty decent variety of enemy types in Ghost of Tsushima, with enemies wielding different weapons that require different approaches to combat, and you're going to want to get familiar with enemy movesets, as a well-timed parry to open up the enemy to an attack is one of the most effective techniques in the game, though by the time I rolled credits, I felt pretty confident going into battle with pretty much any grouping of enemies. Fighting a group of enemies at once is a lot of fun, but for me, duels were where the combat was at its most exhilarating. These 1v1 battles serve as Ghost of Tsushima's boss fights. Here, you're stripped of your bow and tools, and left to fight purely with your sword. This means you'll have to closely pay attention to your opponent's movements, learning when to dodge and parry to break your opponent's defense, and whittle away at their health bar. It's in these moments that Ghost of Tsushima is at its most cinematic and engaging. What separated the infamous and Sly Cooper games from their peers was how fun traversing the environments was. I was curious how character movement would feel in Ghost of Tsushima, since it's obviously much more grounded in reality than both Infamous and Sly. I'm happy to say Ghost of Tsushima's traversal mechanics still feel just as good as you'd expect in a Sucker Punch game. Climbing around the environment is fun, but it's the inclusion of a grappling hook that really helps to elevate movement in Ghost of Tsushima. Swinging between buildings or gaps atop mountains is gratifying, and the grappling hook is used to great effect in Ghost of Tsushima's environmental puzzles, as you try to figure out how to get around areas with broken bridges. Of course, it wouldn't be an open world game in 2020 if there weren't some RPG elements scattered in to enhance the feeling of character progression. Ghost of Tsushima handles character upgrades in a familiar but satisfying way. There's several skill trees to fill in to upgrade Jin, equipable charms to collect that offer perks, and you can gather resources to have an armourer or trapper upgrade your outfits and item storage capacities. There are also countless articles of clothing you can collect that offer a lot of variety both aesthetically and in terms of gameplay benefits. The gameplay hook in Ghost of Tsushima is similar to a lot of open world games. Between story missions, you'll be exploring the world to find optional objectives in a very Assassin's Creed-esque manner. What separates Ghost of Tsushima from other similar open world games are the non-traditional activities you'll be doing along the way. There are tasks like following foxes who guide you to shrines, slicing bamboo by quickly inputting a combination of buttons, soaking in hot springs as Jin reflects on his thoughts, or composing haikus. These unique and non-violent side activities offer an interesting and welcome reprieve from the usually combat-heavy missions. Of course, if you're looking to engage in more traditional side activities, there's also enemy camps to clear out and side missions to complete. As is the case with most open world games, the side missions in Ghost of Tsushima are hit or miss. On one hand, the character-specific side missions are great. They offer a lot of character development for Jin's allies and deliver some of the best storytelling in the game. On the other hand, a lot of the other random smaller side missions just boil down to talk to a villager, go to a location and kill a bunch of enemies, then report back to that villager. In addition to these side missions, there's another type of optional mission called Mythic Tales, and completing these was some of the most fun I had in Ghost of Tsushima. In a Mythic Tale, you'll talk to a musician who tells you a legend revolving around a person with a special weapon, suit of armour, or ability. You then go on a multi-part adventure in search of this legendary object/skill. These missions are great as they offer unique gameplay elements that you don't see in any other mission type. For example, you might be given a clue where to go next in the form of a painting. You will then need to scour the environment in search of the location in the painting. Each of the 6 Mythic Tales offers its own unique twist on the gameplay of Ghost of Tsushima, as well as a pretty significant reward for completing it, so you'll definitely want to complete them all. While ticking off icons by completing the side objectives scattered all over the map is something that you do in nearly every open world game these days, it still never seems to get old for me. I find it cathartic to slowly see a once vast and empty map slowly filled in with locations I've visited and activities I've completed. Ghost of Tsushima's world is visually striking. The environments are breathtaking, filled with dense foliage, great lighting, and impressive looking weather and particle effects. Though certain character models don't look great, especially in terms of their facial animations, and a lot of the animals in the environment have a very janky look to them. Additionally, the fabric of Jin's outfit frequently clips through his sword and other parts of his clothing, and the birds that are meant to guide you to undiscovered activities often get caught on the geography of the world. These issues are much more noticeable as this game is coming right after The Last of Us Part 2, which was so immaculate graphically. If you've been on Twitter lately, you've no doubt seen your timeline bombarded with Ghost of Tsushima screenshots. In my Last of Us Part 2 review, I said it was the most I've ever used a photo mode. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Ghost of Tsushima actually overtook it for the most I've used a photo mode. I took literally hundreds of screenshots while playing Ghost of Tsushima. The game's environments are so beautiful, and I loved how much flexibility the photo mode offered for enhancing your screenshots. Performance-wise, Ghost of Tsushima is incredibly impressive. Not only does it run flawlessly at a consistently smooth frame rate, it also has some of the most impressive load times I've ever seen in an open world game. Upon dying, I was right back in the game within 2 to 3 seconds. There's also a lot of nice little details in Ghost of Tsushima that all add up to make the game feel more immersive. For example, swiping the touchpad after a fight makes Jin clear the blood off his sword before sheathing it. I found myself doing this after every single fight, as it just felt like what Jin would actually do. I also have to give a shout out to the practically perfect trophy list found in Ghost of Tsushima. It's a rewarding list that asks you to dedicate a fair amount of time to it, but it never asks you to deal with any unreasonable bullshit. I know trophies don't matter to most players, but for the people like me who they do matter to, they matter a lot, and it's always appreciated when a developer puts care into crafting a great trophy list. Ghost of Tsushima is another great game in PlayStation's exclusive lineup, and it's a worthy send-off for this generation as the last major PlayStation 4 exclusive. There are a few rough edges, but when taking the package as a whole, Ghost of Tsushima is one of the most engaging and fun open world games of this generation.